Hello, 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 hello. Hello and welcome to the very first big questions of term. Do make sure that you grab a sandwich if you haven't yet. And yeah, enjoy the various biscuits and water and crisps on your table. I hope you enjoy. Big questions is, my name's Dorothy. I am a third year studying law at Trinity Hall. And Big Questions is something that the Cambridge Christian Union puts on. And it's basically a space that we kind of provide to invite people in and think about some of the really big questions of life. So questions about life, about its meaning, purpose, and the claims of Christianity. And we would really like this to be a conversation. So if you see that Q&A up there, the structure of this lunchtime, will be a short talk, and then we'll have a Q&A, which you can put your questions in and upvote other questions if you rate those questions. And then we'll have, we should be finished by 2, but we'll also have this open till 3, so feel free to stay, feel free to chat. You'll also find other ways to carry on this conversation, which I'll draw you to a bit more later, but you'll see some feedback forms on your table. Feel free to be writing questions if you want someone to speak to you about those at another point. And also, there are books on your way out. Those are a few of the things. But without further ado, I'm just going to invite Tom up. So as you all know, Tom, you can head up actually to the podium, and then you can use that microphone. I'll just maybe, get it higher. Yeah, I know. Tom, who are you? What's your name?
Hi, I'm Tom. I live and work in London and work with Christian unions trying to help them think through kind of questions of politics and public theology, basically.
Lovely. And also key question, we've got your name, we've got what you do. What is your favourite biscuit?
Yeah, I recently went through a bit of a conversion on this. I would have said jammy Dodgers, but there's chocolate digestives which come with a layer of caramel.
Oh.
It's got to be those.
Interesting. See, that's big questions here. And what is the big question that you're particularly talking on today?
Yeah, so we're going to spend the next few minutes thinking about, can we ever hope to establish justice? Our world wants justice, we want to see it established, don't we? But there's lots of different competing visions, and I think we'd all say justice isn't perfectly in the world, is it? So why is that? How do we go about doing that?
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll leave you to that. And then remember again the Q&A at the top, and we will hear from Tom. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dorothy. Really nice to be here today. Nice to see so many of you and to have kind of in-person events and be with you all. It's really great to be here. So we're thinking, can we ever hope to establish justice? That's our question today. And as we get started, I want to ask a question to you. What do labour unions, gay rights groups, and the American Nazi Party have in common? What do gay rights groups, labour unions, and the American Nazi Party have in common? Now, you're probably sat there, what on earth can these groups have in common? They are so utterly opposed to each other. They are so different in their aims, their means, and their belonging. They surely can't have anything. And I think that makes the response even more confusing. One journalist, Jonah Goldberg, did a bit of digging into justice and how we define it. And he looked at these groups and was surprised to find that they all insist they are champions of social justice. They all insist they're champions of social justice. Let that sink in. And that's my point today, my big point. Justice has become so confused, so distorted, and so untethered from any sense of objective reality, meaning, or value, that to call for justice or to pursue justice is practically impossible and ideologically incomprehensible. Within this confused climate, there is no hope for justice to be established. So, where are we going? There's 2 problems, and then I'd love to suggest 2 possible solutions to you. So, problem number 1, we do not agree what justice is. I've touched upon that, haven't I? We do not agree what justice is. And yet we all want to live in a world where there is no injustice. We don't want a world where children are abused by those that are meant to protect them. We don't want to be subject to violence or humiliation because of our gender. We don't want to live in a society where people have no choice but to sleep on the streets. I hope on this we are all agreed. But these statements do not tell us what justice is. They might show us what it looks like, but they give us no meaningful or working definition. And that's a problem, because before we can establish justice, before we can have hope of bringing justice about, we've got to know what it is. As I was doing some reading for this, one writer put it this way: seldom do those issuing the calls for justice acknowledge that currently there are competing visions of justice, often at sharp variance, and that none of them have achieved anything like a cultural consensus. Even within this room, we could ask around, and you would all have, I think, a different definition of what justice is and how we go about achieving it. Take, for example, a kind of an issue that's been in the news recently, the Insulate Britain group, the kind of Extinction Rebellion spin-off that wants the government to fund and take responsibility for insulating homes. Now, they've been making headlines by kind of disrupting motorways and traffic in a bid to achieve their goals. Now, on their side, injustice is the kind of climate crisis. It's the destruction of the world and the planet that we love. It's the continuation of CO2 emissions. And yet, from the motorist side, the motorists caught up in these protests, they feel injustice at the sense that they can't get to work in time. They can't fulfill their 0 hours contracts obligations. They are angry that ambulances can't get to where they're meant to go because of these protests. Both sides want justice, but as the news report that I was watching pointed out, both sides have different ideas of what justice is, and they're at loggerheads as to how to achieve it. It's just one example, isn't it? But it gives us a brief snapshot of our society more broadly, I think. People disagree on justice because of their ideologies, whether they're conservative or progressive, whether they're socialists or capitalists, whether they're libertarians or communitarians. People on both sides claim they're on the side of justice. And people divide also, don't they, on single issues: climate change, welfare, immigration, minority rights, end and beginning of life, foreign and trade policy, even house building, as the recent kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard kind of complaints have been making the headlines in the news. And it's not only that, is it, but our tribe increasingly defines our view of justice. We're quick to dismiss those that are different from us, quick to ally ourselves with our tribe, whatever they may be and whatever they're doing. And whilst we might call for justice and compassion, we're very willing to ride roughshod over such notions when it comes to interacting with our opponents. At best, I think we can agree on some end goals. We want to see the elimination of poverty, of racism, of war, of famine. But even with these fairly limited and pretty much universally accepted goals, people would diverge on how to go about achieving them. We've got no common vision for justice. We have no means of achieving it. How on earth can we begin to have hope that justice will be established? And this is something we feel, don't we? We're frustrated and angry. We're despairing and sad about this. It's why public discourse often swings into such inflammatory and aggressive language. Because those that disagree with us on what justice is and how to establish it, they're standing in our way. They're stopping us achieving our vision of justice. By definition, they are opposed to justice. And so tensions increase, temperatures are raised, and violence becomes acceptable, at least violent rhetoric. And as battle lines are drawn and pitchforks are raised, our hope for establishing justice ebbs away. It ebbs away as we see the intransigence and the apathy of those in power towards matters of injustice. It ebbs away as we become frustrated, tired, and angry that nothing seems to change, despite protests, charities, inquiries, elections, political protests, and legal challenges. And it ebbs away as we begin to perpetuate that injustice as a means of cutting through with our side of the story. We don't agree what justice is. But there's a second problem. We are all culpable for injustice. We're all culpable for injustice. So let's lay aside that issue for a moment. Even if we could agree on what justice is and how we achieve it, would we be able to do so? For many years, we have assumed that the world is becoming a better place, haven't we? That justice is on its way, and that we'll all be happier in a liberal, internationalist, democratic, capitalist democracy. But for those of us who are kind of Generation Z, just think about what our childhood and our coming of age has seen. It's been defined by 9/11 and the war on terror. It's been defined by the failed democratic uprisings of the Arab Spring, by the greed and the financial manipulation of the banking crisis, by rising inequality levels, and by domestic political turmoil, both here and in the United States. And now we're living through a pandemic. More pertinently, we've seen the protests recently, haven't we, of Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter. And we feel a pressure, a longing, a want to be part of the solution. And yet things can look so bleak. Even though it's 2021, justice remains elusive. In fact, we might even go so far as to say that even though it's 2021, injustice seems to be more prevalent than ever. The rise of social media and 24/7 news and international travel help us to be more and more aware, doesn't it, of the suffering and the injustice across the globe, all over the place, of the pain and the hurt that is in our world. But why? Where does this injustice come from? Well, perhaps the problem's out there. Perhaps the problem is the Tories, Donald Trump. It's big tech like Facebook or capitalist companies like Amazon. I think that's far too easy. That gets me off scot-free. Because if society was a manifestation of millions of people acting just like me, just like you, would we live in a world of perfect justice? And if you're anything like me, the answer to that question is pretty devastating. Maybe you don't believe me, but take, for example, the way that we call for multinational, international corporations to pay their tax. Well, yeah, at the same time, don't we go home and illegally stream the sport, steal from the work stationery cupboards, and jump on our friends' mothers, cousins, brothers, dogs' Netflix account to avoid paying what we owe? Or the way that we call for a kinder society, and yet we're very willing to get behind our keyboard and start spouting off abuse to strangers, or even friends. We demand justice and then turn into bullying opponents without a shred of respect for their humanity. We walk around in t-shirts that say, in a world where you could be anything, be kind, and then we turn around and start ripping into Brenda from Huddersfield because she's got her views on the environment all wrong. Or we start to alienate Jacob because he's decided he wants to take a grad job in an international bank. Maybe these examples aren't you, but I'm confident we'd all have things we'd be ashamed of that we wouldn't put on our public record. So what's the solution to this? Do we just all need to try a little bit harder? Maybe if I donated more money, or if I volunteered more, or recycled more, campaigned more, maybe if I educated myself more. I don't know about you, but I certainly feel incapable. I feel crushed by all the demands that society tells me I must fulfill to be just. I can't establish justice. I don't have the integrity or the ability. I can't establish justice because I don't know what it is. I don't know how to. I feel crushed and overwhelmed. And part of dealing with that is lashing out at others. It all becomes one big comparison game. I can justify myself by saying, at least I'm not like Priti Patel. At least I don't eat meat. At least I read anti-racism books. But not only is that distasteful, it's a miserably low bar given what's at stake, isn't it? When justice is at stake, that's miserably low. So can we ever hope to establish justice? I think the answer is no, if it depends on us. We're all culpable for injustice. Pretty negative so far, but I want to suggest some solutions to you, some places where we can look for hope to establish justice. And our first one is that there is one who defines what justice is. There is one who tells us what it means to be just. So where do we turn amidst these competing claims and philosophies? Maybe your natural instinct is to go towards a scholar like Karl Marx or Foucault. Maybe we need to get in line with activists like Greta Thunberg or a movement like Extinction Rebellion. Well, I think all those problems that we've just covered apply here just as equally. We're in desperate need, aren't we, of someone or something to come along and define justice for us and give us a clear vision of what we're aiming at. But who, what, and where? Well, Christians, people in the Christian Union here, people who come to this church, believe that there is one who does know the answer to these big questions. One who has authority to speak on these big issues and has the power to achieve change and difference. A song in the Bible, a psalm, tells us this. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. And a verse earlier it says, the Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love. See, the Christian God is the creator, the ruler of all, with immense power. He's the rightful king and judge of all, and he loves righteousness and justice. His word is right and true. He is a place that we can turn for hope to establish justice. But I've still not defined it, have I? So what do we learn are the standards by which we're going to be held accountable? What do we learn are the standards of God for justice? Well, when Jesus is asked what's the greatest command in the Bible, he replies with these words. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbour as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. That's the way the Bible defines justice. And do you see how all-encompassing that is? Not just what you say, not just what you do, but your thoughts, your heart attitude. How easy it is to appear just, to look righteous in public, but to actually be so in every thought, in every word, in every deed, in every action. It's a high bar, isn't it? But imagine a world where we all genuinely treated each other like this. Where we all related rightly to one another, where we gave each other what we would like to be given. That's the world that we would like to live in, isn't it? And yet, we can't do that. Injustice pervades in our society because it is pervasive in us. The Russian author Solzhenitsyn said this, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. And I think this helps us understand why our search for justice is so unobtainable. Why after so many systems of government, so many charitable efforts, so many protests, our society remains broken and dysfunctional. The problem isn't the system, it's not the government. The root of injustice is found within each one of us. So there's one who knows justice, but secondly, there's one who will establish justice. There is one who will establish justice. Because you might have sensed, okay, we know what justice is, but that's quite scary, right? Because if it feels unobtainable, then I'm part of the problem. And I'm just waiting to be condemned. If I call for justice, I'm waiting to condemn myself. And I think if we're honest, we feel a bit of that pressure in society, don't we? Cancel culture, whatever you want to call it, gives us a flavour of that. One misplaced tweet, one unfortunate photo, one rash thought wrongly expressed, and you certainly get a feel for society's longing for justice. But as I said earlier, cancel culture is a way of expressing our own self-righteousness. By cancelling others, I show how just and virtuous I am. But the problem is I'm not. It's a right demand for justice, but one that no one rises above. That is all but one. The Bible speaks of a promised king, a servant who will not rest until justice is known across the earth. He will bring light to those in darkness, freedom for the imprisoned, and sight to the blind. Jesus says these words in one of his biographies. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. Jesus gives us a life of justice. He gives us a glimpse of what it might look like to relate rightly to God and neighbour, of what it looks like to live as God intended. He gives us a sense of the peace and the freedom that comes when one truly loves God and neighbour. We want that, don't we? But it was not completed. This was only a taste. And as Christians now, we await the day this kingdom arrives in full, when the Bible says that every tear will be wiped from every eye and all pain will cease. Can we ever hope to establish justice? Yes, because of this man Jesus. He's the one who does what we can't do. He is the one who knows what justice is and has the authority and the ability as God's rightful king to implement it, to live it out. So will you put your hope for justice in him? Because on the day that he returns to establish this just kingdom, to bring about this world with no more crying or pain, there's also going to be a great sorting. Those that reject Jesus as king, who reject his plan for a just and a right world, choose instead to rely on their own efforts at justice. They choose to follow their own works. And the truth is, none of us will be able to stand on that day of judgment. We've already said, haven't we? We are all culpable. And yet there's hope. There's hope that we can stand on that day of judgment, because when Jesus dies at the cross, God exacts his judgment there and then on Jesus. The perfect, just king is on the receiving end of his own sentence. Our injustice, our evil, our inability to live as we should, all the judgment and punishment that should be mine, that should be ours, goes on Jesus. At the cross, our injustice is counted as being his, and his perfect life is counted as being ours. The Bible says this: he did this to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just, the one who eliminates all injustice, and the one who justifies, the one who takes unjust people and makes them righteous, all who have faith in Jesus. Injustice does not go unpunished. Evil is not tolerated, and yet there's hope for me and you, despite our injustice. For those that put their faith in Jesus, the judgment has already been done. The price has already been paid. He paid the price that I deserve to pay. He took the judgment that I deserve to sit under. He opens the way for us to enter into this kingdom of justice, that life that we all long to see, and to model that justice, serving our community, serving our world, serving our neighbours. Knowing the way to establish justice does not lie with us, but with him. Jesus, crucified on the cross, who brings about justice and enables me to care as I should. Will you put your hope for justice in him?
Yeah, so I'll give you a bit of time to ask them to put them in. And we've already got some. So Tom, if you want to come back up, there's a very brief rest for the legs. Maybe I'll head from down here. I guess the first question might be, so you talked about like a final day of justice, and you talked about how we're all personally like incapable ourselves of proper justice. What do you think then of still seeking to be just in life? Is there any point in that? Is there any value in, attempting to do good, as it were? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, great. Great. So the Bible tells us that we must pursue justice. Particularly if you look at the Old Testament, it is such a key command. There's a verse in a book called Micah that tells us to seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. That is a call for the Christian and for all people to seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. So yeah, we are to be people who care for justice, and to just because we believe that justice is coming perfectly one day doesn't mean we shouldn't go about trying to improve the lot of the land now and bring about or attempt to achieve some justice now.
Thank you. Okay, next question that we've got is, how come God is so just but allows injustice in our world?
Yeah, so I'm going to slightly push back, and God doesn't, I guess, yeah, okay, you look around the world and you say there is injustice. I want to say, actually, God doesn't allow that. That's why there's going to be a day of judgment. That's why he sends his son Jesus, because he says that is not good enough. This is not what the way the world is meant to be. God is not happy with the way that things are and is working out a plan. The whole Bible is a plan of God bringing together things culminating in that final day when there will be a just kingdom. We don't always see what that plan looks like. It doesn't always make sense to us. But God is working, and as a Christian, I can have great hope and confidence that he is working towards justice and isn't happy with the status quo.
Okay, and if God is powerful and could bring about justice, then why does he wait till that eventual justice?
Yeah, great. So I think there's a few things going on there. Firstly, there's a great beauty to the gospel of Jesus, of us seeing the mess and the brokenness of the world and trusting in God to bring that about a better one. I find that incredibly hard at times to make sense of life. Why is it that friends and people that I know suffer and hurt? And yet, I've got to trust that God is good and that God is working, because the Bible tells us that he is good. And I think from personal experience, I know that to be true. And yet, it doesn't always make sense. That is a good and right question to ask. And so I still have to look to Jesus and see that he is working towards that justice. It might not be at the speed or the time that I want it to, but I trust that there's things going on that God knows that I don't understand that helps make sense of that.
Thank you, Tom. Another popular question we have that's come up is, how is justice served by punishing someone else for our mistakes? So that might be, correct me if I'm wrong, whoever it is, you can't actually because it's anonymous. This might be getting at what you said earlier about Jesus being punished, and at that point God exacting his judgment on us for our injustice. How is that justice if Jesus is the one being punished?
It is outrageous, isn't it? That's ridiculous. What is going on there? That's in some ways kind of known as the scandal of the gospel, that I, someone who's unjust, gets off scot-free because Jesus has taken my punishment for me. That is outrageous. We should ask why is that the case? And we should respond with a great respect and thanks that is the way it's happened. Why is it not unjust, though? Well, Jesus voluntarily does that. It's not like he's an innocent bystander caught up in something. Jesus willingly chose to go to the cross and take the punishment. That was planned. And it's not like Jesus takes real punishment there. He is literally guilty for us on my behalf. Justice is punished, therefore, through his death on the cross. It's not just kind of some act that kind of pulls the wool over our eyes and kids us all into thinking it's okay.
Thank you very much. We got another question, which essentially, it's a very long question, but the gist of it is, you mentioned the opposing definitions of justice that come into conflict. But what about if we just pick the one that has a greater morality? So, for example, what if the use of force was used for one side of justice, and the conflicting one, we'd say, has a greater moral, imperative, as a greater moral basis? Would that, I guess, would that work? And yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that as a measure of deciding what is more just?
So just kind of weighing it up case by case and seeing what's happening.
Yes. I mean, so this question also asked, do you think the use of force to introduce/maintain justice is allowed? So I guess, what would you make of those conflicting justice aims when one seems to be more moral and one seems to be potentially using force or that type of thing?
Okay. So, yeah, I think I said, didn't I, that the Bible defines justice as relating rightly to God and to neighbour. And outside of the Bible, all these other kind of ideas and theories of justice, it's not that there's no truth in them whatsoever. It's not that they're completely wrong. There are good things and bad things about all of them. So one of the things I think we need to get good at is recognising what's good in these theories of justice and these aims, and what's bad. And that's quite hard work at times. But I think the Bible helps us to do some of that. I'm not saying that there's no. If that's helpful for the first part of that question. I don't think you can have justice without some sort of coercion at some point. So we rightly want some people to go to prison and take punishment, right? Wayne Couzens, for example, the prison officer that raped and killed Sarah Everard, we want him to be punished. We don't want him just wander around doing what he wants, do we? There's an element of coercion in that punishment. That's quite an extreme example, but coercion and the use of force at times is a good thing, because it restricts the evil in society and enables the rest of us to go about safely and enjoying the good gifts of life. So there is a use of force, but I guess I'd want to know a little bit more about the kind of question. Do feel free to come and catch me after that. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Or come on me. Do you want to come?
Pardon?
No? Did you want to? No, it's fine. Don't worry.
Okay. No, I was just say there's a question maybe slightly related to that. Mentioned use of force. What about when atrocities and use of force has been used in the name of Christianity? We probably don't have chance for any more questions, so maybe have one quick question after this. So this is second to last.
So when the use of force has been used to enforce Christianity?
Yes. So what do you make of the how do you reconcile what you've said with the Bible's call for justice with the injustices committed by Christians in Jesus' name?
Yeah, great. Really, really great question, and it's right, isn't it? We look at history and we think, what on earth is going on there? If they're the people that claim to be standing for justice, what on earth is going wrong? So I think a lot of that is actually some Christians, we do have to hold our hands up and say we got that wrong. We pursued our kind of own tribal thinking and our own vision of justice that suited our comfortabilities and that sort of thing, and power for ourselves, rather than doing what we're called to and relating rightly to God and neighbour. And I think I guess to pick up on one particular thing there of the kind of enforced Christianity, the Bible tells us to share the gospel with other people. That's why the KICU have put on events like this, and why we're willing to chat. But it never tells us to enforce Christianity. It never tells us to make other people Christians at the point of the sword or using force. That being said, I think sometimes in the past we're quick to dismantle Christians who've been in government or whatever as enforcing their Christianity. Anyone who's in government, any ideology or power or whatever, is enforcing their worldview through the systems of the state and government and that sort of thing. I don't think Christians are alone in having done that, and I don't think any of us, that's kind of how government works. And so there's a need to kind of disentangle two of those issues there. But yeah, Christianity enforced the harm of other people is a bad and wrong thing. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. We're actually probably going to draw the Q&A there to a close. In terms of what else we're putting on as a Christian Union, the next time we have big questions is on the 5th of November, as you can see behind me. And we also have something called the Thought Festival, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. So do keep an eye out on the Big Questions platform and the Christian Union platform to see more as we explore other big questions of life, faith, and the claims of Christianity. We'd love to see you there. See you soon. Bye.